I want to make an introduction to chess video, and for people who maybe just know the rules to chess but really don't know how to play. So this is it. Some things I want you to notice about the chessboard is you notice that there's 8 squares this way and 8 squares this way for a total of 64 squares. When you set up the chessboard, your white square always goes on your right hand side. Your queen always goes on her own color. And it goes, your major pieces, your minors, bishops, and the knights, and the rooks. If you look at the board, it's split in half. 4 squares on your side, 4 squares on their side. Couple of things that you want to try to do as you try to get better at chess is try to visualize the whole game in your head, which sounds really hard and it takes a little bit of practice. People without trying, if people don't educate themselves, can usually remember about 5 things in their head at one time. 7, maybe for somebody who's aware of that, and 8 can be accomplished, but only through practice. It gets pretty difficult to remember 8 things in your head at one time. And you can try this. You could just start naming random nouns off or something like bird, house, cat. You could probably remember what I just said pretty easy. If I throw in another one, let's say lion, you might still remember bird, house, cat, lion. But if I start throwing, the closer I get to 7, actually what will usually happen is when you get to 8th, you'll actually kick out one of the items in your mind and replace that, and you cannot recall it unless you practice. So 7's usually pretty high, and like I said, 8 would take you to practice on your own. Now you can use some tricks in mental memorization by dividing things in half. For instance, you say, well, how are you going to remember 8 if I can only usually remember 7? Well, split things in half. You can remember 2 sets of 4, and that's pretty easy. Some things that you can look at in the chessboard is, if you'll notice, every corner is going to have an opposite color. So since you start with your right white, you know that's going to be black. You know on the far left side it's going to be black. Since this is black, you know that's going to be white. Another thing you can notice is the diagonals are the same. This is black, that's going to be black. This is white, that's going to be white. That might seem kind of trivial, but it'll actually play an advantage to you because you won't have to consciously think about, oh, I've got a bishop here. What color is the bishop on the other side of the thing? Without even looking at it, if you remember, I told you this is white, that's going to be black. So what color is the square on the other side of this? It's black. Another thing, I think I already mentioned this, but queen goes on her own color. I want to talk about 2 other important concepts. They have something called strategy and something called tactics. Strategy is kind of a general overall what you want to accomplish. The tactics is how you accomplish those. If you notice, politicians love to talk about strategies, but they don't talk about tactics, because you need to know tactics in order you apply your tactics in order to achieve strategies. For instance, I'm going to give you a major, pretty much every chess player that I know agrees on that studies the game, is a major overall strategy is you want to capture this and control the center of the board. And if you do that, you should win the game, or at least have a very high advantage over your opponent. And there's a number of reasons for this. If you control the center of the board, you can shift your attacks wherever you want. You can up through the center, left side, right side, and up through the center. Your opponent, if he does not control the center, if he gets stuck on this side, it's very, very difficult for him to pivot his attack over to here. Pretty much he's got to start his attack over here because he doesn't control the center. If he has attack coming over here, it's very hard for him to switch to the other side. Where white can even do diagonal attacks also because he can pass it through the center. So another way to look at the board is you got the center, left, right, and you've got your diagonals, and those are important. So now that you know, oh, okay, Every chess player in the world says I should be taking control of the center. Well, that's a nice strategy, and it is an excellent strategy. But how do you accomplish that? That's where tactics come in. And the tactics are the one-twos of the tasks that you're going to use to, I wonder if that's where the word comes from. The tasks that you're going to do to accomplish that. For instance, let me show you a couple important moves. If you're getting started out in chess, the King's Open is very good. That move right there is very powerful for a number of reasons. One is it attacks these two squares. One of the very center ones, these four squares are considered the centermost. Attacking this one and one supporting it. You're also occupying one of the center squares on yours. So right there you've theoretically accomplished a major strategy move right there, in that you've taken control of the center. And it does make it easier for you. Also, if you look at the rest of the pieces on the board, of course the knights could always come out. Again, if you brought your knight out here, it's a little bit considered better because you're putting more pressure on the center square. Again, you're taking control. This knight could also come out, put center. So those are givens. But some other things, after you make that move, to look at is your bishops. Your bishop, your white bishop, can come out and go to any one of these squares. Your queen can come out, go to any one of these squares. Also, if you notice on this square right here for black is one of the weaker squares. If you look at it right now, who's protecting that pawn? The king, and you're trying to capture the king. So the king is not the piece you want to be protecting it. And it's very easy for you to come out. Look at all these pieces that I can put down and attack that square. I can even go here and attack that square. So this is a very good opening for a number of different reasons. Now, black's gonna probably do the same. Next, I like this move. And the reason why you say, well, why would he do that? All the same reasons that I just discussed for white apply to black on his side for pretty much. I bring my knight out. The thing I like about this move is it puts pressure on the center square, and it maintains something called initiative. If you notice, when I do something and you can almost count, or the other opponent has to respond in a particular way, you have the initiative. You're setting the tempo of the game. You kind of know what's going to go on. I come out here, and now I can worry about my next move. What am I going to do after this? It's very unlikely black is going to attack me. It's very likely that black's kind of behind the game, so to speak, and that he needs to defend that, or he'll just take it because there's nobody protecting him. There's nobody. And something interesting is you're not protecting this guy either, but it is not being attacked because his last move was here, and so he has to decide whether or not he wants to defend this or attack this. Most of the time, they'll defend it, which makes more sense, which is good for you because you can continue something called development. In chess, when you move, you want every piece to move out with the reason, and it's best if you wait. Sometimes you want to move a piece because you understand you're trying to develop it, but don't be too quick to move a piece for the sake of development unless you have no other options that present themselves good. It's oftentimes better to allow your opponent to force you to move into a developmental position that you wanted anyways. Now, at this point it gets kind of tricky for white because he can do a number of things. Once you have tempo, which we had, it's good to maintain tempo because you get to dictate the way the game goes. Now, I have a decision here. I can give up my tempo, and that's kind of dangerous, but there is times when you want to give up tempo. For instance, I could, which I wouldn't do, I don't like this move, I could bring this knight out, and it would defend this, and also attack this square. The reason why I don't like that move right now is because while it meets the strategy, remember I said, why not wait till he's under attack before I do that? I do that, and I actually lost tempo because I just handed it over him. Now he can do whatever he wants. Maybe a more preferred move by me would be something like this. I bring my bishop out. Now, that actually violates a principle. I want to tell you something. Ideally, if I was going to set up this game from purely a white's perspective, this would be kind of like a very nice setup. Let me show this to you. You want to typically control the center pawns, or center positions is mostly done with the pawns. Next rule that you want to follow is you want to bring your knights out before your bishops. It's just kind of a rule of thumb, and it makes excellent sense. So you bring your knights out, then you want to follow up by your bishops. That's a good development order. You want to castle, then you want to try to get your rooks into play. And usually what happens is you do something like, let's say we went like that. I brought my queen up here and here. Notice that the more of these are kind of like the last guys to enter the battle. The more in line you could get them. Try to do something like that. The more in line you could get them, and the more power you've got going in the same direction. This is a very powerful position. But something along this line where you control the center, you brought your knights out before your bishops, and then you castled to protect, and then you your queen goes in, and then you bring your rooks in finally. Now that also brings up another point that I want to tell you about, and that's the 3 phases of chess. In chess, there's 3 phases in that there's an opening or a beginning, a mid game, and an end game. And this is kind of interesting in that there's no distinction. You cannot say this is when you tell when opening starts because there's nobody there. But that, and let me just show you. If I go, I'm in my opening phase, right? Attacking here. Let's play defensively. We start locking up. Let's say I go like this. I'm just gonna, let's say castle. Okay, now that your rooks are involved and your bishops are starting to come into play, you've castled, the board looks different. You're somewhere, and there's no, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's no distinct line that says you've crossed from opening to mid-game, or that you've crossed from mid-game to end-game. You tend to recognize it, and it's usually pretty much agreed upon. Yeah, he's in mid-game. So this is getting close to mid-game, and the reason why you can tell it's mid-game, the pawns stop pushing usually, and you start bringing in your knights, and they start getting aggressive in the game. So you're still in mid-game. Now you say, okay, so that's mid-game. Another good indication mid-game is your bishops start coming into play. Might do some fianchetto or something like that. When your bishops come in, usually a very good indication that you're in mid-game, and then mid-game, and then end-game is usually when the board kind of looks like this. It's usually the presence of the rooks in there, and there's not a lot of pieces left. Again, and this can go all the way down to where you just have a king and a rook fighting a king and a rook. And again, there is no designation between mid-game and end-game, or opening and end-game. It's just you need to understand that they are different. Now, you say, well, why is that important to understand that there's 3 phases of chess? One of the secrets that a lot of people that's not really a secret. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is there's a point system. A lot of people know that. I'll lead up to what I'm trying to explain. I use the system of pawns are worth 1 point, bishops are worth 3 points, knights are worth, I might have that backwards. There's different styles of giving the points. I think the bishops are 3.5 and the knights 3, and I might have that backwards, but it's irrelevant because the bishops and the knights, well, let me finish it off. The queen is 9, The bishops, we'll just say, are 3, the knights are 3, the rooks are 5, and the pawns are 1. And so what you use that for is you try to decide on, here's a knight and here's a pawn. Would I want to make this exchange? If both these went off, who's in a better position? Theoretically, the blacks only lost 1 point, and whites lost 3 points. Same with like a rook versus a knight. If both those got taken off, the knight's worth 3 points, the rook's worth 5 points. And if I captured his queen, he'd be down 9 points, which is worth all his pawns, if one way to look at it, or a combination of, that's like losing, 6 points and almost 5 points. Queen's worth a lot. And the reason why is because she can move. Now, some point systems value a 0.5 to, and I can't remember if it's the rook or the knight. The reason why I can't remember, because I just remember 3 and I don't really care about the 0.5, and the reason being is because to me it's irrelevant. What happens is, in mid-game, the knights are strong, because in mid-game usually the centers are all locked down if both players know what they're doing. They're fighting for control of the board, you got a bunch of pawns out there. The knights come in, and they have the ability to pass over things. To where, like a bishop, look how locked in these bishops are. Bishops come into play more towards the end of mid-game and end game. Knowing that, if I were playing an opponent and he exchanged, let's say he started exchanging bishops for knights, right? And basically he lost his bishops, and I lost my knights. What effect is that going to have on the game? As long as we're in mid-game, he has an advantage, because his knights are going to be able to get through the mess of the maze. That being said, if I was white, I would attempt to trade down as quickly as I kind of clear the board and get to endgame. And the reason being is because in endgame, the bishops are more powerful. And the reason why is because in mid-game, he can only go here. He's got to do a lot of maneuver. This is a nice long shot, but that's the only one he's got. Imagine if this board was cleared except for the king, the rook, and the 2 bishops. The bishops have an enormous amount of movement space across there. That's why the rooks don't usually come in until endgame too, because they can only go like this. It's very hard to get them out. I mean, if you put a rook right here, you're like 1 move, 2 move, 3 move, 4 move, 5 move. It's very hard to move around. To where, again, if the board was clear, the rooks can move, and you'll see them move very fast at endgame when the board is clear. The queen's kind of doesn't usually come into play until mid-game. You don't want to bring her in. And there's no firm and fast rules. There's something called position versus points. Like I would often sacrifice a piece in order to obtain position. I'll give you an example of a very tempting sacrifice I do a lot. Oops. So he went out here, and let's say he went like this. I went to here, and let's say he pushes his pawn. He's not thinking I'm going to do anything. He's like, actually, let's say he went like, and let's say he kind of is like, nah, he's not going to go for it. Actually, let's say this went up to here. I will oftentimes take this. My point is I will sometimes sacrifice a piece, because if he takes this knight, it looks like I'm losing really bad. I just gave up 3 points for his 1 pawn. But what he gave up was incredible, in my opinion, because he gave up his inability to castle, which you want to castle to protect your king, get him safe. He's stuck out on a diagonal. Look at all these different things that I can attack him with. I can chase him around. And he's in a lot of trouble. I bring this open, it starts coming down. I can bear a lot of power if I castle, if I can clear this rank. This is getting in game real quick, and I even brought my knight on. But so, this is very dangerous for him to take that rook. It's very dangerous for me, but as you get more skilled in chess and familiar, you'll be willing to make those sacrifices if you understand the game and what's going on. I think, again, I want to emphasize, move your pawns out, take control of the center. I'm going to talk tactics later on. Just the thing to remember is strategy is what your overall game plan is, and tactics is how you execute. And being good at tactics is what allows you to make your strategies good. And understanding the tactics. That's the key, is understanding. There's also two, before I go, I'll let you know that there's two forms of chess and learning, or I don't know what the words I'm looking for, learning chess. There's what I call the memorization or the bookwork to chess, and there's the theory. And theory, I would strongly encourage you to focus on theory first and let the memorization come when you want to do it for the pleasure of memorization. You're like, what is he talking about? Okay, I'm very bad with the names of the different openings. Let's see if I can remember one. I think it's called the Ray Lopez. You bring this out, and it's usually signified by the bishop coming out and pinning the, trying to pin the knight. So, when you learn, you'd maybe memorize an opening that's named, a named opening, maybe into 10, 20 moves. It depends on how far you want to go into it. And what you do is you first memorize the sequence of moves. In this one, I know that this bishop's going to get pushed back, and you'll want to leave an exit. And one good exit is to get this like this, so as he gets pushed back, you have a place to go to get out of the way if you need to. If you don't, you can oftentimes find yourself in this situation, which really sucks because you just lost your bishop. So sometime you want to get that. And this is a neat, interesting move. A lot of times it's considered a wasteful move, but it's also a very powerful move because it really shuts down this square, which is key to this bishop, and the knight. Because usually the center's clogged down. But you say, well, what's the advantage of memorizing a sequence of moves? What will happen later on is if you play theoretical, and theoretical is, so basically the book chess or classical chess, if you want to call it that, memorization is you pick an opening like the Queen's Gambit. That's not a good example. The Stonewall attack, the English Open, Ray Lopez. You pick an opening, and you memorize the sequence of moves and how they're quote supposed to go. And it's kind of good to do that. It's good for your mind. And but you should focus in on theory. And theory is like, okay, develop your knights before your bishops. Take control of the center. Use your knowing that there's 3 phases to the games, and maybe a better word than theory is principles. If you understand the principles, then you can apply the principles. And what will happen is, as you apply these principles, that you'll discover that you end up discovering the classical openings on your own. And versus some people memorize the openings and they're going along, and then they forget, oh, what was the 14th move? And then they're confused and they're lost and they're scared because they don't know where they're at. Versus when they're playing and the guy's playing consistent with you, and you recognize the opening, and you know what moves to make without even have to think about it. If you understand that opening in the classics, then you have to do that through study. You know, why did I move here? You have to understand that why, not just following the memorization. When you understand the whys, then you want to understand the whys of the classical moves. You know, what happens if you deviate that? And that takes actually a lot of effort. To me, it's less effort to understand the theory and just play the game. And when I'm in that position, I'm not thinking, well, what was the next move that I can't remember? I'm just looking at the board and applying more theory or principles to help better myself in the game. And what will happen also is if you play by theory, but study the classics, when you're playing, suddenly you'll see, oh, this looks just like... here's a big problem, for instance. To bring this knight out before this pawn or not to bring this knight out before this pawn. You might do something like this, and if you went like this, you're very close to having something called the stonewall attack. And the fact that you recognize it, suddenly you become comfortable with it because you've played the stonewall attack and you understand it. Actually, this would be a semi-problematic in that if you got in a position like this and you recognize that I know I'd want to bring my knight out first. Usually what happens is you want something like this. Let's see, he comes out. Boy, it's been a while. But essentially, there's pieces of it that you'll understand why. For instance, you wouldn't want to block this square because it makes it hard to bring your knight out. But I like to try to get this out before I do this. And you want to get this bishop here and then bring it back here. Those are just some things. The problem with this whole setup is this bishop really becomes really stuck, and this rook might not even ever end the game. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you're playing a classical situation, you find yourself similarly out there, you'll discover real quick, like if I saw this, I'd recognize it and say, hey, I accidentally developed into a stonewallish attack. And there's advantages and disadvantages. Right away I can tell you the idea is to keep all my pieces on the white squares, which is very powerful because it nullifies one of his bishops completely. And also, if you'll notice, all my forces attacking this way. Bishops on the diagonals are very deadly. I love putting bishops on my diagonals. Plus, that's how they move. But this is very dangerous for him because now I'm attacking the weakest piece on the board. And let's say he gets a castle thing going. Boom, he just played right into my thing. If I castle, another thing I know is I want to, let's say I haven't started the attack, I don't want to push this here. And the reason being is because I like to move this rook, and I know that if I went, I could, let's see, I forgot how that goes. Yeah, I could push it up to here, and then I can go like this and out. Or if I advance my knight, let's see if I did that right. If I advance my knight, you want to kind of push there because the knight might go to here or go to here, but you want to keep that square open for two reasons, so the knight can get in and out, because now I can push up to there and go over here and over here. And now if you look, this guy's not in a very good position, but I think I did this wrong. I think I'm supposed to be on black. Yeah, actually I am. But irregardless, as you see how the momentum of the force is all going to that corner, and let him play into that. Let him castle into that and spring the trap. But I guess what I was saying is, as you're playing theoretical, sometimes you'll discover, wow, I'm into a classical situation. And if you've studied that classical situation, you'll know the pros and the cons and why you would not push a certain pawn in a certain order, because later on down the line it'll end up interfering. Anyways, if you found this interesting at all, I know it was kind of rambling and not very informative, I don't think, but if you like this, leave some comments and let me know, and I'll make some more chess videos if anybody likes them, and I might make a couple more just to be, I don't know, attempt to put something useful out there. This is kind of a broad overview, and also if you have any specific questions, feel free to ask. I'm just going to kind of wrap this up and we'll see what happens with this.